What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. Today, we're going to be talking about one New York Giants wide receiver that could bounce back in 2023, and that receiver is Colin Johnson. Now, many of you might remember him. Many of you might know him for being the tallest wide receiver in the NFL, 6'6", over 200 pounds. He's a big frame, big body, ex-receiver, and he was having a really good preseason before suffering a season-ending torn Achilles just last year. So now, going into 2023, Colin Johnson was at the most recent training session with Daniel Jones and the rest of the skill position players over in Arizona, indicating that he might be close to full health. Now, granted, a couple other players there weren't at full health, like Sterling Shepard, but the fact that Colin Johnson was there, kind of just getting along with his teammates, practicing with his teammates early on in the offseason is a good sign, and I'm excited to see what this guy could provide to the team once we roll around into training camp and again into the preseason, because when you're looking at this Giants roster, there are a few wide receivers who are projected starters for the regular season that might not be ready for the regular season, like a Wan'Dale Robinson coming off of his injury. It's expected that he will begin training camp on the PUP list, the physically unable to perform list. So that leaves an opening here, an opportunity for a guy like Colin Johnson to bounce back and be a nice comeback story for this 2023 season. So we're going to go ahead and dive into Colin Johnson, what he might bring to the Giants, and everything in between. But before we do, make sure to leave a like if you do enjoy this episode. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Much appreciated. But without further ado, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend? And what are your thoughts on Colin Johnson?
I'm doing great, man. It's hot as balls in New York City, and if your AC is broken like mine, you are sweating it out. It is brutal out here, but I'll tell you what, spring has arrived and things are looking up, and the Giants are one of those things that I'm very optimistic about. And Colin Johnson, this team cannot have enough quality receivers. We've been tortured, guys, tortured over the past couple of years with a lack of receiving depth. Colin Johnson was a star during training camp. He looked really, really good. He's one of the tallest, if not the tallest receiver in football. I think he's 6'6", if I'm not mistaken, 6'9". I don't know, one of those really tall guys. He's 6'6", 222 pounds. One of the tallest guys in football. He's only 25 years old, in the middle of his physical prime, coming off an ACL tear. What can he provide? Who knows? Could be nothing, could be something. This is a former 5th-round pick from the Jacksonville Jaguars, has 2 years of NFL experience under his belt. First year back in 2020, when he had 272 yards and 2 scores. And then last year, or rather 2021, played in 12 games for the Giants, started 1 game, only had 105 yards, but his training camp numbers, just those preseason numbers are solid. And it was unfortunate to see him go down because he was making some really nice grabs. He was developing some really nice chemistry with Daniel Jones. And it seems like every time Daniel Jones is developing chemistry with someone, every time a player is taking just a nice gradual step forward, they get hurt. And then the entire sequence is messed up. The entire progression is set back to square one. Everyone, it feels like this happens to everybody. Saquon Barkley after his rookie season, Wan'Dale Robinson midway through had his first 100-yard performance. Bam, ACL tear. Sterling Shepard, the second he starts to ramp up, bam, ACL tear, Achilles tear, whatever tear. Guy's torn every part of his body at this point. But, we still love Shep and his off-the-field intangible traits and his leadership qualities, and that's why he's coming back this year. But again, Paris Campbell, I hope to God the guy stays healthy. First time ever in 2022, he stayed healthy, played all 17 games. This Giants team needs the receivers to remain healthy. And if they do, they're going to be dangerous because ultimately Daniel Jones just needs consistency from his playmakers. And we have not had that. Colin Johnson, as we're going to focus in on today, really good size, really good frame. He's got some underrated speed for someone of his size at 6'6", and he was doing really, really well. But what is his impact going to be? As I said before, it could be nothing, could be just a camp body. Maybe he returns from this ACL tear and he fights his way back onto the roster. One thing I really like about this Giants team up to this point is that they give players opportunities to win back roster spots. We saw this last year with Darius Slayton. They were ready to cut Darius Slayton. They were ready to cut him and save the cash. Instead, they were like, Darius, how about this? We give you an opportunity to come back here, have a prominent role in this team, fight your way back into the starting lineup, but you're going to have to take a pay cut to do it, and you're going to have to show us that you deserve to be here. And bam, took the pay cut, fought his way back onto the roster, inked himself a 2-year, $12 million deal. That's pretty impressive. You love to see players rising to the occasion and making the most. Now, it's different when you're coming off a significant injury like this, but it seems like everyone and their mom has a freaking ACL injury this year, so it's possible to come back and be fine the year after. Usually it takes about 2 years to make that full 100% recovery and kind of get back into shape. But Anthony, when you're looking at Colin Johnson, do you see him as more of a camp body, or do you see him as someone that can really kind of compete for a back end spot on this wide receiver corps?
No, I think that he can compete for a roster spot. I don't see him as just purely a camp body because when you look at what Colin Johnson was able to produce during last preseason, had a big performance in the first preseason game against the Patriots, 7 passes for a team high, or 7 receptions rather for a team high, 82 yards. And then in the next game, 3 catches, 41 yards against the Bengals as well. He was playing really well in the preseason, and he was developing chemistry with not just Daniel Jones, but really all of the quarterbacks that were on the Giants roster. And I think that he was getting along well. He was fitting into the system well because he's not like Kenny Galladay. You know, when we signed Colin Johnson, we were kind of looking at it as this can be a good backup for Kenny Galladay. He could do the things that Kenny Galladay does well in a similar fashion. So I don't really think that's true anymore. Now that I look at Colin Johnson, after we saw him play in the preseason, his playing style is a bit different. He likes to get open on those deep crossing routes. He makes some really nice catches and it has a little bit of run after the catch ability as well. He isn't just your throw it up near the sideline and watch him go Babytron, Megatron, Randy Moss on a guy. Like, that's not really Colin Johnson's game. So despite being the tallest wide receiver in the NFL at 6'6", he actually has the ability to get open, find some space, and make some good receptions, which I really like. And I know that's something that the Giants obviously really like. And another thing about Colin Johnson that gives him some added value, the Giants right now have a receiving room just filled with undersized slot receivers. They need to carry at least 1 to 2 backups with some size on their roster, I would assume, right? Because right now, the only big size guys that they have are Darius Slayton, who's 6'1", and then Isaiah Hodgins, who's 6'3", but he's a starter, and you need a backup for him. So I think that Colin Johnson can ultimately be that backup for Isaiah Hodgins. And I'm really excited to see if Colin Johnson's able to return to training camp and have another big summer like he did last year. Again, if he's fully healthy. We don't know where he's at with his health progression right now. Maybe he also begins training camp on the PUP list, and that would kind of throw a wrench into this whole equation. However, I think that he is far along enough in his recovery that he will be able to make an impact in training camp and preseason. And if that is the case, no, I don't think he's just a camp body. I think this is a player who could legitimately find his way onto the Giants roster, have some sort of contribution to be made as a backup on the back end of the roster, and again, really secure himself a roster spot because not only is this a player who has a very unique frame, being the tallest, biggest wide receiver in the NFL, he's also a player that when he's been on the field, been healthy, played in the regular season, he's made a decent enough impact. He's looked like a solid player. Even going back to his time in Jacksonville, there were some tremendous receptions that he made downfield. He was a big play threat for the Jaguars. Again, the Jaguars stunk back then. He didn't get a ton of receptions. However, when he did, he made the most of them when he got those targets, and he made some really spectacular grabs. And I do believe that this is a player who could feasibly start on a really bad NFL roster. And considering the Giants don't have that much depth at wide receiver, they did their best to add a lot of these slot guys, these route runners this offseason, but they don't really have a lot of depth on the outside with any of these X receivers. And Colin Johnson, when you look at this roster, is really their only depth at that position as that X receiver. So I believe that he does have a chance here to solidify himself as the Giants' backup X receiver. And that's kind of what we projected for him last year when he was playing well and Kenny Galladay was stinking it up in training camp. We thought, you know, hey, Colin Johnson can be that kind of insurance plan for Kenny Galladay. Unfortunately, he went down with an injury. We didn't have that insurance plan for Kenny Galladay until we found Isaiah Hodgins. So now I think that Isaiah Hodgins is that starter at the X, and your backup plan for him can be Colin Johnson if he's healthy. So everything is kind of working out for Colin Johnson. You know, it's kind of like back at square one, but he's got an opportunity here to, again, secure himself a roster spot, and I'm really excited by him. But Alex, when you're looking at it from that perspective, just kind of having backups for each player, right? Like when you look at the slot receiver position, the Giants have Wan'Dale Robinson. Kind of the backup there would be Jamison Crowder, maybe. And when you're looking at the Z spot, you've got Darius Slayton, and then there's other backups for him. How do you feel about Colin Johnson being Isaiah Hodgins' backup and potentially filling in on that X receiver role if anything were to happen to Hodgins?
That's totally fine for me. Unless the Giants go out and draft someone who's 100% healthy, they want to groom, fits their scheme a little bit more, I guess, efficiently, then yes, Colin Johnson can absolutely compete for that backup spot. But again, the draft is going to tell us a lot about their plans. This draft is heavy in the first 2 rounds when it comes to slot receivers. There's not that many X guys. You got Quentin Johnston. You could say, Jordan Addison's an outside guy. Even Zay Flowers is capable of it, but he's really, really small in height. So maybe they do prefer him to be in that Z kind of slot mold instead of being on the outside all the time. He's capable of it, did a lot of it at Boston College and whatnot, but we'll see how he kind of translates to the NFL. Obviously a very athletic and really, really great player that anybody would love to have. But, Colin Johnson's a different beast when it comes to being an X, right? He is a traditional outside boundary, big body frame, physical wide receiver with a decent amount of speed, and he's got good hands, right? We saw those hands on full display, and just because he tore his ACL doesn't mean his hands got ripped up either. So, those things are still, the mittens are still there, and hopefully he can expand upon those in 2023. But the draft is going to tell us a lot about these plans. It's coming up fast. It's in in a week and a half. So it's really, really approaching in a very quick manner. And there's going to be a lot to discuss post-draft and what the Giants are going to do with this roster. It's going to give us a lot of insight into their strategy, how this offense is developing, where they saw weaknesses and needed to be addressed. Probably on the defensive side, I imagine they're going to go find a cornerback. I imagine they need a center, a long-term solution there, unless they think J.C. Hassenauer is the next best center in football, which is very unlikely. I just think that they need a long-term solution. I think a lot of you guys agree with us on that point. And a CB1 to eventually take over Dory Jackson's role and transition naturally and organically also makes a lot of strategical sense. So there's a lot of things the Giants need to do. There's a lot of ways they can go, but I'll tell you what, receiver remains a priority. They're going to draft a receiver. It's just a matter of where and when. So I think that's kind of what will tell us a lot about their plans. Are they going to go for a boundary guy? Are they going to go for another slot guy, a smaller guy, someone that's versatile, can go inside out and kind of maybe mold into wide receiver one? We've talked a lot about Jordan Addison. We've talked a lot about even Tank Dell. There's a lot of really good receivers in the first 2 rounds, but a lot of the analysts are not as high on these receivers as maybe the fans are. So there could be a couple options for Big Blue at 25, and that's becoming more probable that some of those top guys, the Addisons, the Johnstons of the world, could be there in the 20s, could be there in the late teens where you might want to draft up and get the best one available. But there's no Jamar Chases in this draft. There's no Justin Jeffersons. There's no OBJs. There's no Devontae Adams. And a lot of those guys, for what it's worth, drafted late in the first round or in the second round. So you can get tremendous value there if you want to. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, late first round. Devontae Adams was a second round pick. Cooper Kupp, I think he was a second round pick. Like a lot of these great receivers were not drafted in the first round. You don't need first round receivers to be a wide receiver one. You just need to be in the right system, have the right developmental tools, have the right things that a coaching staff, a specific coaching staff wants to extrapolate and expand upon. But you got to get lucky too. Sometimes it's all just about luck. Like we were 1 pick away from getting Fred Warner, ended up with BJ Hale, who, by the way, was a productive player, ended up going to Cincinnati, having a pretty good career there over the last 2 years. But 1 pick away from an all-pro linebacker. Like that's how close we were sometimes to these big names. We trade up for DeAndre Baker. We hope he was going to be great. Not so great, obviously. But we trade OBJ. We end up with Dexter Lawrence. Right now, looks like a pretty good deal to me. Dexter Lawrence is going to be an all-pro defensive tackle, hopefully for a very long time. Obviously, the jury's still out, and hopefully he stays healthy. Knock on wood, 1 billion and 15 billion trillion times. But I'll tell you this right now. You need to hit in the mid-rounds too. You can't just rely on your first-round picks to carry the foundation of a team. You need your mid-round and late-round draft picks, some of them, to pan out and become Pro Bowl caliber players, become high-level, above-average starters. That's where the Giants have faltered in the last couple of years. Their mid-round picks have been a graveyard. We need to start hitting on those guys. We need to start getting value from those picks. So if the Giants draft a center or a receiver or a corner in the mid-rounds, we need to be looking at those guys and saying, okay, what do we need to do to make them legitimate starters? And what can we get out of them? Can they be a wide receiver ones or CB ones or, starting centers? Can they be these starters, these prominent guys on a team? What does the development need to look like? So think about the Ellerson Smith of the world. Completely just threw away a draft pick. Matt Pert in the 3rd round. I know we liked him back then, but looking back in hindsight, threw away a draft pick. You know what I mean? Like these O'Shane Ximines had a good year last year at times in the beginning of the season. Kind of feels like we threw away a 3rd round pick because we didn't use them correctly, didn't develop the way we wanted to. There's so many players here that just did not live up to the hype, did not live up to the expectations. 3rd round picks need to be contributing players, right? They need to be contributing at least low end starters or, good depth pieces. Most of our 3rd round, 4th round picks the last couple of years have been none of those things. You know what I mean? So it's tough to look at. I will say there have been a couple hits. Julian Love, nice 4th round pick there. Darnay Holmes has been a starter. Well, I would say is probably not a starting level player. He'd be a good depth piece for another team. There have been some hits, of course, but most of them have been disappointing, and maybe that's a coaching issue more than a drafting issue. So as we've seen, we got a lot of value. But Colin Johnson under the right tutelage could end up being a solid player for us. But we'll see. The draft is going to tell us a lot. The strategy is going to tell us a lot. But I'm definitely looking forward to it.
1000%. I like a lot of what you said there about the middle rounds of the draft. And one thing that I'll say is going into this year's draft, I feel a lot more confident than I have in years past, going into last year's draft and this year's draft, because I really do trust in what Joe Schoen and Brian Dable are building. I see the vision and I see the process. And I trust the process. It's kind of like when you look at what Joe Schoen's draft history was during his time in Buffalo, they did find those middle round guys to contribute. The primary example being Dawson Knox. And then immediately Joe Schoen gets to New York and drafts Daniel Bellinger, and he immediately contributes and looks like a solid starter in the NFL as a rookie. Same position, same draft pick range, at least a day 3 pick. So when you're looking at that and you're kind of just watching what the Giants are building here, there are a lot of reasons to be confident in their strategy in the offseason, finding depth on the lower end of the free agency wire, right? And then also when you look at midseason acquisitions on the waiver wire, there was a few. I mean, we know that Isaiah Hodgins really stands out as being the premier waiver wire acquisition in the NFL last year, but also Landon Collins, a mid-season free agent signing. He had a big impact for this team, and there was a few of those all season long. Gerard Davis started in the postseason for us. Jalen Smith, mid-season pickup. Joe Schoen made a lot of low-key moves, and they seem to be paying off, at least in some capacity. Maybe not all of them are long-term solutions at a position, but he's finding low-key acquisitions that can make an impact. And I believe that this upcoming 2023 NFL draft will be no different as Joe Schoen continues to grind the film and prepare for days 2 and 3 of the 2023 NFL draft. And of course, when we're looking at some of these low-key roster players like a Colin Johnson, who could potentially make an impact for the team this upcoming season. So really, one main message here: I believe in Joe Schoen, I believe in Brian Dable, and I trust in the future of this team. And I can't wait to continue to cover the future of this team right here on Fireside Giants. I love discussing this team with you all. So make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this episode and comment your thoughts down below so we can get active in the comment section and engage together and discuss Colin Johnson and any of these other topics that were brought up in today's episode. So make sure to subscribe to the channel as well if you are new, and ring the bell so you don't miss one. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please make sure to leave a 5-star review. Helps us out immensely. But without further ado, we will catch you all in the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.